Welcome to Road of Echoes. In Episode 9, Shawnee Forest Whispers, Voices from the Deep Woods, Part 2, we step deeper into the shadowed ridges and hollows of Adams and Scioto County, where the Appalachian Plateau falls toward the Ohio River and the forest holds stories older than the trails themselves. In Part 1, we followed the ancient pathways that connect Serpent Mound to the deep interior of Shawnee, tracing the old creek corridors, the forgotten communities, and the first hints of the forest's layered history. Part 2 picks up that thread and carries it farther into the interior, where the land begins to reveal the places people once lived, worked, learned, and left behind. Walk with me into the deep woods. If you're watching on YouTube or TikTok, please like, subscribe, follow, and share. Your support keeps Road of Echoes moving forward. Let's begin. The first settlers came from Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Maryland, and the Carolinas, the restless edge of the young republic. Not the very poor, who could not afford the journey, not the very rich, who had no reason to come. The ambitious middle, veterans with warrants, younger sons without inheritance, families who had heard enough about good land waiting beyond the mountains. They came with axes and seed corn and family Bibles. In the winter of 1816 to 1817, a family in Scioto County did something that seemed to them entirely rational. Consumption, tuberculosis, had taken one member of the household, and now others were growing thin and pale and hollow-eyed. In the Swiss and German folk tradition the family carried from the old country, this was understood as the work of the undead. This is a documented event, recorded in the county records of Scioto County, Ohio, one of dozens of similar rituals that took place in Appalachian communities across the eastern United States in the 19th century. It tells us something essential about the settlers who came to these hills. They did not arrive with an empty inner life. They brought their whole world with them, including the parts the daylight did not show. By 1832, the Shawnee had been removed from Ohio. The land they had named and tended and understood for generations was open, in the language of the new American government, for settlement. The Virginia Military District had been divided into warrants and distributed to Revolutionary War veterans who had never seen it. Surveyors had mapped it into squares. Now the families came to fill those squares with something the surveys had not accounted for: lives. On July 10, 1797, just 6 years after Massey founded Manchester, Adams County was formally organized. Named for President John Adams, it was the fourth county formed in the Northwest Territory. Its original boundaries were enormous. From Adams County would eventually be carved Scioto, Highland, Pike, and Brown counties, the mother county of southwestern Ohio. What began at a river bend with one surveyor's wager had become, on paper at least, a place. To settle these hills was to confront the forest. The trees here were enormous. Tulip poplars 5 feet across, white oaks older than the colony, American chestnuts whose canopy blocked the sky. To farm, you had to cut them, burn the stumps, and coax crops from soil better suited to trees than to corn. To farm, you had to cut them, burn the stumps, and coax crops from soil better suited to trees than to corn. In the first years, settlers lived in round log cabins chinked with clay, with dirt floors and no windows. The forest was both resource and adversary. Everything they had, shelter, fuel, furniture, fence rails, came from the trees they were trying to remove. The creeks were lifelines. Brush Creek turned mill wheels, watered livestock, and in the right season carried flatboats of flour to the Ohio River. George Sample, writing in 1806, described loading 2 flatboats with flour at his mill on Brush Creek and floating them all the way to New Orleans. In an era without roads worth the name, water was the highway. The settlers who understood this, who built their farms and mills close to the creek, were the ones who prospered. The others learned it the hard way or moved on. The settlers who understood this, who built their farms and mills close to the creek, were the ones who prospered. The others learned it the hard way or moved on. Families buried iron under doorsteps to ward off evil. They read the weather in the flight of birds and the behavior of animals with a seriousness that was not superstition. It was knowledge, accumulated across generations in conditions where being wrong could mean death. The hollows, after dark, were understood to hold things that the daylight did not reveal. In that belief, the settlers and the Shawnee who had come before them were more alike than either would have admitted. Education in the hill country came one room at a time. Across Adams and Shawnee counties, communities raised small schoolhouses wherever enough families had settled close enough together to fill a bench. A single teacher taught all grades. School ran when farm work allowed. The schoolhouse was not just for learning. It was where elections were held. Church services gathered before a proper church was built, and the community recognized itself as a community. 7 such schools operated within what is now Shawnee State Forest. None of them are standing. Most of their sites are unmarked, but their names persist on the oldest maps: Sulphur Lick, Needmore, Beasley Fork, Blue Creek, Tulip, Nesbit, Upper Churn Creek, a roll call of communities that once existed and then did not. Built near the Sulphur Lick spring that gave the creek its name, partial stone foundation walls survive, rising about 2 feet from the forest floor. The best preserved schoolhouse ruin in the forest. A mature walnut tree grows from the center of the old classroom. Community school for Needmore Hollow, a settlement whose very name spoke of want. Enrollment peaked at 22 students in 1905. By 1925, only 4 children remained. Closed in 1928 when the last family with school-age children moved to Portsmouth. The Beasley Fork Community School, serving children from a 3-mile radius of Hollow and Ridge. Foundation stones are reportedly still visible beneath decades of leaf litter and greenbrier. A hand-dug well nearby once provided the school's water supply. A 1-room school serving the Blue Creek community, built of local timber with a stone chimney. Closed when the improved road to Manchester made the consolidated school accessible by wagon. The schoolmarm's salary in 1910 was $25 per month. No physical trace remains. Named for the tulip poplar grove that shaded its yard, referenced in Adams County School Board records as Tulip District School Number 7. The school's final teacher, according to county records, was a woman named Marsh, who taught all 8 grades simultaneously. Named for the Nesbit family who donated the land. Shown on the 1916 Peebles quadrangle as a small square symbol with a flag. The school served the Ridge community between Churn Creek and Brush Creek. Closed in 1918 during the influenza pandemic and never reopened. Served 8 to 12 families along Upper Churn Creek. Abandoned after CCC road construction in 1935, rerouted the community's gravity toward the new forest roads and the valley below. A local historian reports a depression in the ground where the outhouse pit was, but no structural remains. Adams County lay directly across the Ohio River from the slave state of Kentucky. The river that was a commercial highway was also the line between slavery and freedom, a line that hundreds of enslaved people risked their lives to cross. A network of abolitionist settlers in Adams County operated stations on the Underground Railroad, sheltering freedom seekers and moving them north. The same hollows that were hard to cross made them easier to hide in. The same landscape that tested the settlers was, for those who had suffered far more than hardship, a path towards something that felt like the future. In the decades following the Civil War, the timber industry moved through Appalachian Ohio with stunning speed. Railroad spurs pushed into the hollows that had no roads. Sawmill towns appeared almost overnight, rough, busy, temporary places that lasted only as long as the accessible trees. The pattern was consistent. A company arrived, stripped the timber from a tract, moved the operation, and left behind stumps and ruined streams. In some hollows, a town that had housed hundreds of workers was empty within 5 years. Timber was not the only resource extracted from these hills. In the mid-1800s and into the early 1900s, building stone was quarried from Vastine Hollow and Patch Hollow in what is now the state forest. That stone was moved by railroad to the Ohio River and loaded onto barges bound for Cincinnati. Much of it went into the construction of buildings in the growing city: foundations, facades, bridge abutments. The stone of the Shawnee Hills is in Cincinnati today, though no one who passes those buildings knows it. What remained in the hollows was the wound the quarry left behind. The hill country soils were thin, prone to erosion, and exhausted quickly by row cropping. By the late 1800s, farms that had been productive for a generation were failing. Young men left for Portsmouth, Columbus, and Cincinnati, drawn by factory wages and a steadier life. The hollow communities that had once supported schools, churches, and post offices began to contract. One by one, the schoolhouses closed. The Needmore community, whose very name spoke of its struggle, had dispersed by 1930. The land was going back, not yet to forest, but to scrub and eroded hillside and the slowly returning silence. Into this strained landscape came a final blow that no farmer could have anticipated. Beginning around 1904, a fungal blight swept through the American chestnut population with catastrophic speed. 4 billion trees dead within 40 years. In the Shawnee Hills, the chestnuts that had fed generations of wildlife and provided mast for hill country families died standing, their gray trunks becoming landmarks in the recovering forest. It was in this context, stripped timber, exhausted farms, dead chestnuts on the ridges, that Ohio began to see the hills differently, not as farmland that had failed, but as forest that could be brought back. On December 5, 1922, Governor Harry L. Davis dedicated the Theodore Roosevelt Game Preserve in Scioto County, the nucleus of Shawnee State Forest. It began with 20,000 acres of cut-over land, purchased at low prices because the market had already given up on it. The ambitions were large. Thousands of ring-necked pheasants and wild turkeys were already in place, with deer, bear, and dozens of other species planned. The land the settlers had cleared, the timber companies had stripped, and the farms had exhausted was being asked to become something again. What that would require, in labor, in sacrifice, and in the willingness to look honestly at what had been done here, would not be fully understood for another decade. In 1825, a decapitated body was found near Stony Creek in Adams County. The murder was never solved. The head was never found. For decades afterward, locals reported seeing a headless figure standing beneath an old oak tree near the creek at nightfall. Whether the ghost was real or the story was the community's way of processing a violence it could not explain, the effect was the same. The land had absorbed something that the living could not fully account for, and it gave it back in the only language available: story, sighting, warning. Every culture that has lived in these hills, the Shawnee, the settlers, the families who followed, has understood in its own way that this landscape holds what happens here. It does not forget. It has never forgotten. The question always is whether we are paying attention. By 1922, the land the settlers had built their lives on had been given back to the state. Within 11 years, the Great Depression would bring hundreds of young men into these same hollows to do by hand what the market had refused to do on its own: build a forest. Their story of labor, of segregation, of a fire that was never explained, and of a landscape remade by people whose names were never put on the signs, is told in Part 3. Thank you so much for listening to Road of Echoes. If you're watching on YouTube or TikTok, please like, subscribe, follow, and share this episode. Your support helps Road of Echoes grow and keeps these stories alive.